sometimes borderline illegal.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I have to be very careful.
Yeah. It's careful. It's recorded. 1 minute. Okay. Should we start?
Okay. Whenever you're ready.
Okay. So we'll start. Thanks everybody to be here. For being here. Sorry. So we're super happy to welcome Juan Llanos, whom I met in Colombia actually on a meetup about financial innovation in the Americas. And so he's going to be here to present crypto regulation, what to watch out for. We especially going to have some time also for Q&As at the end, so don't hesitate in asking questions at the end. And I'll let the audience up to you. Thanks, Juan.
Merci. Thank you. Malheureusement, je ne peux pas parler en français couramment. Mais alors, anglais. OK? Ou espagnol. C'est ma langue. Ma langue maternelle. Qu'est-ce que vous préférez? Espagnol, anglais, pas français. Alors, okay, so I got involved in Bitcoin in probably July of 2012. In New York, I live in New York City. I'm from Argentina originally. And the talk of in this world was Mitt Romney, which was a presidential candidate, had his tax returns hijacked. And the hacker was demanding Bitcoin to release them, or else he would release them. So everyone was talking in the press, oh, what's this Bitcoin thing? You can hold people ransom. And that's when it called my attention. I was working in a money transfer company, remittances company in New York. So we were doing United States to 40 plus countries in the world, money transfer d'argent, des États-Unis or the rest of the world. And then I was also a specialist in anti-money laundering compliance, right? This is what I do for a living, compliance officer. So, comment se dice, blanchiment des capitaux? Or la prévention du blanchiment des capitaux, to be clear, right? So that was my role in the company, financial services. I landed in the United States in 2002, a few months after September 11. So all these new regulations started coming up and being applied to non-bank financial institutions. I was working in a very small company that needed to come to raise their compliance level to the level of banks. Very hard to do without budget, without understanding the regulation, the enforcement, atmosphere and all that. So I got into this world of Bitcoin and I started writing a blog, and I started saying something like this. And no one understood why, and some people still don't like me because I say this. Oh, Bitcoin cannot be. Bitcoin is against the rules, can never be regulated. But my argument was that any transfer of value between point A and point B by any means, that's important, is already regulated by international money transfer regulations, right? Or there is there's a framework to control funds that flow from A to B anywhere in the world by any means, whether it's typical banking systems, whether it's electronic systems, whether you take merchandise from point A to point B. For example, diamonds. You know diamonds, right? Diamonds are very tiny and very expensive and high value. So you can put a diamond in your pocket, travel the border, and sell it in Belgium, right? And then you compensate. That is money transmission also, right? Also, expensive cars are regulated for this exactly the same type of reason. Helicopters, planes, ships, high value items are all regulated for potential money laundering because of the high value. You buy it here, you put money in here, you transfer the object, you sell it, the money has moved to a different location, right? So I knew all these things. I was a specialist in this. I started saying this is almost 4 years ago. But then my focus started going to what can be done with the technology, right? Okay, it's very high risk, it's already regulated, but what about the potential of the technology? That was my interest, right? So we started talking about property rights, recording property rights on the blockchain, right? Why? Because of the immutability of the blockchain. You can secure a timestamp, a fact, and it will remain there for the rest of time. Then we started talking about e-commerce, imagining that anyone can get paid from anywhere in the world. Very interesting, right? A reserve currency. This is more recent, right? But I grew up in Argentina. I grew up in hyperinflation. You know what hyperinflation is? In 1989, milk was $2 in the morning and $4 in the afternoon. In July of 1989, 100% growth, inflation rate, in a day. That is hyperinflation. And when something happens like that, it explodes. The central bank cannot control the system. So what do? They devalue the currency, there's a crash, there's a run on banks, it's a disaster. So when we started seeing that this was a non-inflationary currency that it controlled inflation over time, we saw, okay, this is interesting. Now maybe we can have savings in a non-national currency that will survive time, right? That was kind of the idea, reserve currency. Then we see remittances. That was my business. I thought our company is going to be out of business immediately because of this new peer-to-peer, wallet-to-wallet system, right? And then we started now more and more the evolution of the blockchain and smart contracts. You start seeing about renewable energy, the democratization of renewable energy, and finally, one of the biggest things, you can put identity or some form of identity on the blockchain that makes it portable and interoperable, right? Because we cannot port our identities today. It belongs to the government, right? So this is what happens. And my driver was, my argument was regulation is so complex, it's going to be a killer of this technology. And I still believe there's a risk that the powers of the government could kill this technology, the evolution of this technology. I'm very worried about that. And then we'll talk about that. So the main problem is that these people, these are Somali immigrants in the United States that cannot send money to Somalia from the United States. Why? Because the banks consider Somalia a high-risk country, destination country, so they are not allowed to have bank accounts in the United States to send money home. What is the result of that? There is a government imposing regulation on top of banks to control potential money laundering, but then millions of people suffer from that as a side effect, right? What happens with these people? These people had to flee from their embattled countries. 2-3 million people displaced from their homes. They cross the border, they come to Germany, they come to Italy, they come to France. They don't have an identity. Why? Because the monopoly of identity is in the hands of governments, right? So this is the one problem that I, as a specialist in anti-money laundering, I saw around the world. If we have this standard, an expired government-issued photo ID, there's going to be a problem in FinTech. We talked about that in that session in Colombia. We have to change the standards in order to create innovation in FinTech. That was my problem, right? So I think that the problem of government standards and regulation is huge for the evolution of this technology, right? So, and then philosophically, we started asking, what is regulation? You know, why do regulations exist, right? Usually, the goal of regulation is to prevent market failures, prevent problems from going sour, right, from getting worse. But there's another kind of regulation that stimulates progress, right? It's in place to create jobs, development, growth, right? And then this is more cynical, right? How do you say cynical in French? Cynic. Okay. Is it an instrument of power, right? Why are some companies given a license and not other companies? Why are some companies allowed to operate in one jurisdiction and not in another jurisdiction? Who makes those decisions? So all these philosophical questions led me to design this mandala of regulation to be able to explain it clearly. Because when I remember that I was here in 2015 at the Bitcoin, La Maison de Bitcoin, and everything was about, this is revolution, the government down, it's like the French Revolution again, right? 2,000 years later, right? to 100 years later. So we come back to this and, oh yeah, the government is exploiting society, blah, blah, blah. Now we have the path to freedom, right? Libertarian mindset, anarchist, right? So, but anyway, kill all regulators. That was kind of let's ignore all regulation, let's go for it. And some people you still read today on Twitter, they just want to go that direction. They ignore the regulation, just build an alternative universe, right? That's one path. But if you're 50 years old, like I am, and if you want to build a business, you think, okay, maybe we should be more cautious because I don't want to spend the rest of my life in prison, number one, because if I am in prison, I cannot build anything, I cannot make money, I cannot be happy. I have to be behind bars. That's number one. And second, maybe I want to build an infrastructure or a stepping stone, rather than just a step function, or a completely revolutionary way of doing things, radical, right? So I started explaining there's three kinds of regulators in the world, right? One is a policymaker. The policymaker cares about this, job growth, development, right? These are the politicians that get elected in Congress, right? They're here to promise to society growth and stimulus. Elect me and I will get you jobs and stability and progress and everything. They promise everything, right? So the focus is stimulative. They want to stimulate the economy, right? So if you go to regulators and start insulting these guys, they may kill the innovation that the blockchain is promising, right? So you want to be very clear with these people, explain what's going on, and have a different attitude, right? The second type of regulator is prudential regulators. Once you're offering a service in the world, you have to be very prudent, right? You have to be cautious, careful about how you offer and how responsible you are in offering the service, right? So they care about safety and soundness, systemic risk, consumer and investor protection, right? So this is why there is a Securities and Exchange Commission. They have to authorize the issuance of a security before it goes to the market because it's so risky, the risk of loss is so big that they have to make sure that there's safeguards, there's some safety net, right? So they're preventative in nature, right? And there's also, finally, law enforcement, the police, right? If you break the law, the police comes and just enforces the law. Their job is to enforce the law. You cannot negotiate with law enforcement. You cannot just kill someone and say, oh, I wasn't, no, you see, this gun is not mine, I was just found it. You cannot negotiate it. Non-negotiable. Huh? So law enforcement is completely different. And you cannot, Ross Ulbricht is spending 3 lives in prison because he broke the law in this aspect, right? So we have to be very careful about regulation. So this was about what to watch out for, right, in general. I'm just giving you a very general overview, but I want to make you think about how we can bring this new technology to the real world, right? And then in each of these companies, each of these sectors in the government, we have supervision, policy, supervision, and enforcement. So you see that the Securities and Exchange Commission has an enforcement section, right? They're going after the bad guys, the scams, the fraudulent ICOs, right? Now, so that is the enforcement division within a prudential regulator intended to protect consumers from loss, right? And then also the SEC can create policy internally, right? Or they can have a different supervisory focus. Sometimes these two are very political, and this is something we have to watch out for. That's why we have to understand what government we're in. If we are in communist China, for example, or it's not communist really, capitalist China, right? If we really think about it. So we have to be careful who are we talking to and which of these is going to be a trap for us, right? And same if you go to, if you're in the Trump government, for example, we live in the Trump government now. It's completely pro-stimulus of the economy, right? So they're reducing regulation, they're getting rid of a lot of prudential regulation, they don't care about prudential regulation. Let the market decide. Let the market make mistakes and learn from the mistakes. Let's not create these thick rules and safety nets like the socialists, all socialists create all these rules, like in France, right? Just kidding. I have to make a joke in France. I may not come back, that's why. So, one. So anyway, so we have to be careful where we are if we have to decide on a strategy, design a strategy for launching a product or an industry even, right? So this is my new model for explaining regulation. But then I have been talking about this for a long time. Regulation is valid for society. It's valid, it's good. It pursues, to some extent, it pursues certain good outcomes, right? It wants to protect consumers. For example, aviation, right? Would you go on a plane today where the pilot decides not to do the checklist, the security checklist? Optionnel. Pilot sits and say, okay, do we do a checklist today? Yes or no? Nah, I don't like to. Would you accept going in that flight as a consumer? I wouldn't. I would like to see the engineering checklist and then the onboard checklist all done before I take off. I like to see that. Why? Because the checklist is the result of 100 years of aviation mistakes to prevent market failures, prevent failures in general, right? So it's good. It pursues a good goal, right? So it's safety, soundness, security, privacy, whatever the value, the regulation has some potential good things, right? And it's inevitable because we live in societies where the state, the government, controls our lives. This is really the truth. Can you walk out naked in Paris today? Maybe it's legal here, maybe in in the Marseille, in the south of France, there's nudist, naturel, whatever, beaches. But you cannot just do whatever you want. You have to be within a societal framework. So it's inevitable and valid for those reasons. And then compliance, I am a compliance officer. I have to make sure that the product is safe, that I won't go to jail, that I have to create a safe industry and a safe company. It's very expensive normally, but it's also valuable because it allows you to operate in the market. For example, Coinbase. Are you familiar with Coinbase? Coinbase has money transmission licenses in all of the world. 48 states in the United States, plus all of the world. So they're legally operating anywhere in the world. They're already supervised by dozens of jurisdictions around the world. Is that good or bad? It's very good for them, right? They're in business, they're collecting fees, they're collecting funds, consumer funds. They have to spend a lot of money to maintain the infrastructure, but they're in the market. They're making money. If you don't play by the rules, you don't play the game, right? So that is kind of my message in general. But then we go to, why does it have to be like this? Why is regulation inevitable and why is compliance expensive? And this is what I decided to devote the rest of my life to eliminate regulation and to make compliance automatic via the blockchain, via robots. So this is the exciting thing about the future. And we have the problem that regulation and technology is always out of sync, right? They're never accompany one another. Technology, regulation, technology, no. Technology goes like this, regulation goes like out down here, always. Why? Because regulation, if you read Nick Szabo, I would recommend anything by Nick Szabo, right, by the way, who's a genius. Bonsoir. There's always a mismatch, right, between regulation and thing. So this is very general. I know that you may probably have questions about tokens, securities, rules and regulations. We're gonna spend half hour talking about that, but I just wanted to present some of this to you as an introduction to the problem of innovating with new technology in a world of wet code. Nick Sauer talks about wet code. Have you read about that? Wet? Human systems are very wet, are very, it's like wading in mud, right? Very slow, very complicated, they're not like electronics. In electronics, you press a button, there's an input and an output. Input, output, input, output. It's deterministic, right? There's an input or a stimulus and a response, always, electronically. Why can't we not have regulation electronically? Because there's bureaucracies whose jobs the government wants to maintain. That's my cynical answer, right? So can you replace the government with computers? You could easily replace the government with computers. But where are the jobs, right? So, and that is probably of concern to the French more than many other countries, because naturally, I mean, the French have been subsidizing the countryside for decades or centuries probably, because they need to be sustained. They need to be maintained as an economy, right? But now comes automation, robots. The blockchain is a robot. It's a global supercomputer, it's a robot. You can automate anything on the blockchain, right? Or with the blockchain, right? So this is very philosophical to make you think about this, but this is regulation today. This is why there's a clash in regulation. Regulation is by industry. There's regulation for the food industry, regulation for photocopiers or consumer products. There's regulation for planes. There's regulation for chairs and furniture. So it's by industry and by product. And the blockchain is not by industry or product. The blockchain is very horizontal. It touches everything, right? And it's about activity. If you do money transmission, if you move money from A to B, the money transmission regulation applies. The activity is money transmission. Therefore, you read the money transmission rule book, right? If you do custodianship, if you custody assets, you have to comply with custodian regulation, the regulation that applies to banks, with a lot of cybersecurity, a lot of capital requirements and all that stuff, right? So it's by product, by industry, by product activity, by jurisdiction. So you have that issue here in Europe. You have each country, and then you have the EU, or the European Economic Area, that also have double jurisdiction, right? And then you have international regulation, right? So it's by jurisdiction, and the blockchain is not. It's completely jurisdictionless, right? And then if someone wants to enforce the regulation, they go to some intermediary. It's designed to be enforced through intermediaries, but the blockchain paradigm is completely different. It has no permission, no limits, no borders, it's anonymous, it's peer-to-peer, not intermediaries. It could be flexible, inflexible, depending on what the design in the smart contract. Very transparent against privacy and confidentiality, and it's not entirely final in the sense of the law that the law requires. The law requires something very final, but the blockchain as we know it with proof of work is probabilistic, because there's some likelihood that there could be an attack, so it's not 100% final. So all these problems with the blockchain, we now have to deal with, whoever is in regulation, whoever is in technology. And people are ignoring these discussions. They just go with it. They say, go with it. Who wins? Who is the winner when there is a new industry coming in and there's a clash between an old world and a new world? Lawyers. Right? Quelques avocats ici? Oh. See? Who? You? Are you a lawyer? Oh, somewhere here. Okay. Okay, so this is the truth. I know I'm a member of many organizations around the world, but one of them in New York has 2 industry members and 35 law firms, all frothing, trying to sell billing hours to any client that comes through the door. You know, why? Because they don't talk about these things. They say, let them go into the lion's den and they will need me to kill the lion. That's the strategy of the law firms, right? My job as a non-lawyer, I'm a non-lawyer, proudly so. Je suis très fier. my goal is to help society evolve into a better society where people have more access to services, when things are less bureaucratic, cheaper, faster, easier to understand, and all these things that now technology enables, right? So we have a problem with the public blockchains, and this is why we have now private blockchains. Because private blockchains are very similar to the old world. It's like an intermediate, it's like a limbo or a purgatory, right? Between hell, today's world, and the future, heaven, with the blockchain, right? So now we have these private blockchain implementations that meet the regulatory requirements, and now this is why we have had to create a quorum, a private implementation of Ethereum. So that has permissions, privacy, higher performance. Consensus cannot be done anonymously, has to be done by also only authorized people, because you cannot have anonymous transactions. They're not allowed by the law, right? And then you have settlement finance. So we are creating a semi-private world where we're innovating in partially, right? Okay, so so the blockchain revolution is completely against the rules as we know them, right? That's my conclusion. I hope it's clear to you that nothing that exists today in any rule book, and I'm happy to debate this with lawyers or even presidents of nations, nothing that is already written in the law today applies to the blockchain revolution. Nothing. Everything has to be redone, rewritten for the future if we want to make the blockchain succeed. That's my personal opinion. And this is why we have problems with securities tokens, with utility tokens, with consumer tokens, with hybrid tokens, with tokenized securities tokens, and all this crap. Why? Because the letter of the law is describing things that happened 30 years ago, problems that surfaced 50 years ago, and now we have a new thing when we want to reinvent a new future now, new products and new ways of doing things. So that's kind of my thesis. And one of the things that bothers me a lot is anonymity, right? Anonymity obviously is preferred by many people. Why? It's very simple. You don't have to pay taxes. That's a very nice incentive to stay anonymous, right? Oh, now I can buy something that is not very kosher or halal, right? I can buy things that are not allowed in the marketplace because they're, I don't know, controversial, right? Like drugs, second identities, right? And all these things, right? Or I hate someone and I cannot just pay someone, a murderer, with a credit card. Well, murder services it has to be very secret and very confidential, right? So all these things are worrying to the regulators today. And few people are talking about them, right? We're talking about the growth and the evolution and the stimulative aspect of the economy. We're now thawing capital around the world. Anyone, a retail investor, can now become rich in a year, right? Or not, right? But that's a promise, right? But there's a lot of regulators around the world, especially in Washington, D.C., that are very concerned about identity and anonymity, the lack of anonymity. And this comes from this, I'm not going to go over this, the Groupe d'Action Financière Internationale, based in Paris, GAFI, la GAFI. ¿Conoce? Okay. Bueno, the GAFI is the international body, the United Nations of Anti-Money Laundering Policy, right? They create policy that the G20 countries, actually, by the way, the G20, what are the G20 countries? The richest countries in the world, right? So we haven't seen yet the response of the richest countries in the world to the emergence of the Bitcoin and the blockchain. We have not yet seen it. No one has reacted yet. There's been a few slaps in the wrist to some companies. Some people are in jail, some people are in and out of jail already. But we haven't seen the response of the power of the coercive power of the government yet, in my opinion. So I don't want to scare you, but I think that things are going to get very complicated. So look at this. This is anonymity is against the international money transmission financial services standards, right? In 2006, the Financial Action Task Force, la GAFI, published something like this. These are the features. Financial services cannot have these characteristics because they're risky. So they said anything that resembles cash is very high risk. We should move away from that. That's 2006, right? In 2013, they talked about emerging payment systems, report on new payment methods, and they said all of the high risks, anonymous, 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 no record keeping, no limits, wide geographic. They're describing the blockchain, right? And this is 13, right? And then in 14, they already published a paper especially on virtual currencies, all about anonymity risk, right? So anyway, my point of this section is we have to be careful with anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing rules. And when we started seeing those attacks in France the last couple of years, I was really scared. Because now the government will have a reason to enforce the law very strictly, or create new policy that's very restrictive to the emergence of new technology. I was very scared with the attacks here in Paris. We started seeing some in the United States, and I said, this is going to be horrible. And this keeps me up at night because I just want the evolution of technology to work. I want innovation. We want this to evolve, but it's very, very scary, right? Anyway, I'm not going to go over this. You can have a copy, but this is where I am explaining how enforcing anti-money laundering rules prevents innovation in fintech, right? National security and crime deterrence, top priority goals. If Trump says tomorrow, we're going to go for zero tolerance on international or hidden value transfers, or hidden shadow economy, it's called shadow banking. Comment se dice shadow? Ombre, no? La banque à l'ombre. Right? Je crois. Je sais pas. So shadow banking, right? If shadow banking is a priority goal, they're going to go after it. And it will have an impact on anything that has to do with cryptocurrency, right? So anyway, if you strictly identify standards for surveillance, obviously, they want to make you pay taxes and they want to chase you if you commit a crime. That's the purpose of KYC. So we have this. We have Somalis around the world that cannot, creating financial exclusion. If you apply too much pressure, you exclude 2/3 of society. And this is what's happening in the world today, right? Anyway, so tomorrow we should have a lighter hand, measure proportional right, and then create privacy in different ways or mechanisms for identity. This is not for you, it's just for academics. I just put it here because I've given this talk in many universities, right? Same with identity. There's an alternative to identity, right? So why not have a portable identity? Why not have private identity? And the reason why personal, persistent, private, and portable identity is not standard today is that the government wants to know who you are all the time. Why? 2 reasons. You have to pay taxes. We have to get you if you don't pay taxes. And number 2, if you commit a crime, we have to arrest you. Those 2 reasons are the reasons why people need to be identified by governments at all times. Have you thought about that? Hopefully you now will think about that, because when people say, oh, Monero, Zcash, Dash, wow, excellent. Now we're going to have truly anonymous virtual currencies and cryptocurrencies. Okay, but the G20 are going to talk about that in March in Buenos Aires, actually, my city, my country. So they're going to go to Buenos Aires and say, okay, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with this growth of virtual currencies, financial crime, monetary policy? We cannot control monetary policy. We cannot control inflation. central banks are regulators of the economy, right? They raise taxes, they lower taxes to control inflation, right? We don't have that if the money is completely managed by a blockchain or multiple blockchains. So monetary policy is one aspect. Financial crime is another aspect. So how do we deal with these problems? There have to be serious conversations, and we're not having them yet. Anyway, so these are solutions for identity that we're trying to create. So again, another problem is that digital information sharing, the blockchain is about sharing information, the same database across all nodes, right? Everyone has the exact same copy of the truth, of the state, right? Well, see, however, regulation expects each financial node to have their own closed copy of the database. So it's crazy. So regulation is designed to be enforced individually, by silos, by protecting the databases and not for sharing, right? So that has to change, right? And then regulation should allow shared platforms. But again, we have to go to Congress, convince number one, Monsieur Macron, the President. So, Mr. President, we have to get a new, and he's kind of open, he's very innovative, right, apparently. So maybe he brings, okay, now let's start creating shared platforms, shared systems. He sends a bill to Congress, l'Assemblée nationale, je crois, and then they decide, okay, now we're going to have information sharing is going to be legal in France. That has to happen. It takes, what, 2 years of negotiations, political negotiations, at a minimum, right? So, and then the administration has to start implementing this, and then it has to be approved by the European Union. So we're looking at 10 years of regulatory changes. How do we deal with that, right? Anyway, the point is we have to rethink, redefine everything, and we have to, my goal and my expectation is that we all start trusting these new blockchains to self-regulate by means of the tokens and the rules and smart contracts, and by creating incentives, the right incentives through tokens. And this is very radical, and I'm presenting this idea anywhere in the world. People want to listen to it. Why not create systems where everyone, even politicians, are incentivized with tokens to create the right outcomes? Silence, right? Silence. Une minute, s'il vous plaît. Okay, so, and then we have these features in the blockchain, right? These three things. This is the three things that are revolutionary, right? Shared information, same version of the truth. Programmability, and then the tokens for incentivizing the right behaviors, or disincentivizes the wrong behaviors, right? So anyway, we are creating new markets, and then new laws and new rules on the blockchain. We should, I think. So this is my advice. Unfortunately, this is not going to be very amenable to many, but I believe in this. I think the new world, the 21st century, requires focus on the spirit over the letter, substance over form, and engineers and programmers over wet code, humans, right? So we want to focus on the outcomes of the policy goals, not the rules. You know, bureaucracy is a triumph of the means over the ends. The means are more important than the ends, the outcomes. That's why we have buildings and books and rules and processes and steps and phases and hierarchies. Why? The process is more important than working, producing, being happy, being safe, right? Why don't we focus on that? And it doesn't matter how we achieve that, but we focus on the outcome, right? So that's strengthen the product from the organization from within and create algorithmic oversight systems. Systems that control themselves. Robots, basically. Anyway, so how are we on time? 15 minutes. I can stay here for another hour if you want, but I didn't know what you were interested in, so I'm saying all this. I hope it's helpful, but anyway, this is the life of an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur wants to do something, but then talks to a lawyer, and then they only can do a fraction of what they wanted to do. That's the life of an entrepreneur, right? The want minus what they have to do is what they can do. Why does it have to be like this way? Right? Anyway. So this is my 3 I's, very creative process or mnemotechnique. You have to innovate, but you also have to implement controls, basic controls at a minimum, and try to influence policy changes. If you forget one of these, you don't have responsible innovation. If you innovate and implement and do not influence, the government are going to do whatever they want at some point and going to crush you. It's a risk. Because not everyone in government has the intentions of protecting society. They use sometimes regulation as an instrument of control and political control. So you have to be able to have an influence in how the rules are made. If you innovate and lobby all the time, but don't implement controls, you're irresponsible. Because you just have a facade, the appearance of safety and security, but you have a very bad system. That's irresponsible. It's like those companies that do a lot of branding and PR and marketing. We are the best in the world. I can think of so many, I'm not going to say them, but there's a few. They do all the time, but they have zero substance in the middle, no implementation, no safety, right? And then if you implement a lot of controls, you lobby all the time and do not innovate, you stay where you are. We don't progress as humans. So I think that the combination of the 3 is the ideal state for responsible evolution, in my opinion. But you may disagree, of course. So, and these are guys that I read and I trust and I admire because of their philosophical positions and forward thinking. So Vinay, you've probably seen him and heard of him before. Have you heard of Vinay Gupta? Yes, you have? Okay, Vinay is a great guy. He's a guy he's a futurist, right? He thinks 500, what's going to happen to society 500 years from now? That's what he thinks about, right? So he talks about technology, and look at this. He talks about mechanizing rules and compliance, removing the need to remember the law. Why do we have to remember the law? Why can't the law not be written in some computer that we all is auditable, reviewable, we trust it, and then we just go about our lives, trusting that no one will change the rules? That's revolutionary, right? Not changing the rules. Then governance as a service, smart statutes, digital law, software definitions of law. He talks about converting wet code into dry code, as Nick Szabo says. And he talks about this. This is what is an inspiration to me. And this is what I do at Consensys. We're trying to create a FinTech and RegTech practice to automate away the cost of running civilization. Running civilization is very expensive for civilization. We consume a lot of resources. There's a lot of errors and mistakes and failures. We have to be able to do this. And then, of course, he talks about incredible visions for compliance. And Nick, another incredible. I mean, if you're in the Bitcoin space, blockchain space, you have to, please read Nick Szabo. He's a philosopher, he's a scholar. He talks about this, we're talking about that, smart contract. He was the inventor of the concept of a smart contract. And the reason why we're talking about smart contracts today, we shouldn't be talking about smart contracts. But the reason is that he was a computer scientist and a lawyer at the same time. So contract, which is a legal term or a legal concept, got in the way of computer science, and now we're talking about smart contracts. But they're just basically programs, logic that automates some process, right? And he talks about this also, which is interesting from the social impact standpoint, right? Historically, every member of society is at the mercy of strangers. Do you know Monsieur Macron personally? Is he a good guy? Do you go out for drinks? Do you share something? He's a stranger. However, he has the power to make you do things. So I'm talking about one president of a civilized, highly civilized society. Imagine a dictator in Africa, right? So we're trying to lower the vulnerability to the whims of strangers with technology. And blockchain is this autonomous system that has that brings that hope to society, right? Anyway, so these are things that, in my opinion, these are inspirational pictures also. This is Dubai in 10 years, right? So someone in this country made the decision to create a modern society, right? How they did it, we can learn from that and replicate it. Same in Singapore, right? So Singapore started like that, and now it's like this, right? So anyway, these are inspirations that I don't have to tell you that, right? You're in one of the most civilized and advanced countries in the world. But when I go to my country, we don't have ambitions, right? We don't have aspirations. So we're just at the mercy of whoever is in government. We don't care, we don't control our lives, we don't have the luxury to control our lives, etc., etc., etc. So anyway, thank you for the attention. I really appreciate your attention. I may not be able to come back again because of something that was not appropriate, but I hope it was helpful to make you think. My purpose is never to be agreeable, it's always to make you think. I don't care about anything else. Thank you very, very much. Merci beaucoup. If you have any questions or comments, I can tell you what I'm working on right now. I am very happy to be part of Consensys. I don't know if you're familiar with Consensys Systems. It's the largest blockchain company probably in the world. Very complex organization at this point, where we do basic infrastructure on Ethereum, everything on Ethereum, the Ethereum blockchain, and infrastructure, products, applications, developer tools, all these components are required to create decentralized organizations, decentralized systems and applications. And there's also consulting, education, asset management, venture capital, huge group of very well, at this point, very well structured company. My role there is to build systems to automate away the cost of running civilization, trying to replace code and old technology and old systems that require a lot of humans to be reviewed and a lot of subjectivity, to remove the subjectivity and put it on in a machine. So we're trying to create what's called RegTech, regulatory technology automating systems. And obviously I'm also an advisor because I've been in this world for some time. Some companies like Ripio, Bitpagos, the RCN token, CoinMe launched a token last year. Everyone launches a token now. So, but I knew the companies before the actual token protocol existed. So I've been helping them with regulatory strategy, anti-money laundering rules, controls, programs, government relations, policy influence, and all that, right? So I'm an advisor to Metal, to Ripio, to CoinMe, and Bitwage, who are based in Paris also. Anyway, that's what I do. I get compensated by them in tokens. And so I have an incentive if I cared only about that, I have some incentive to make the ecosystem grow. But I just care about other things, but I just disclose that so you know where I come from. And obviously, any questions, any concerns, criticisms? Quelques questions, commentaires, oui? Scalability. Well, is there any technical person here that can talk about the issues? And we can talk about them too, as far as I know. But scalability is.
Yeah, because we have the problem generally in the Ethereum because we want to do lots of transactions.
Yes.
As you know, with Visa, we do 45,000.
Are you with the Visa, by the way?
No, I'm not, but I mean,
it's okay.
We do like 45,000 transactions.
Of course.
That we have the problem with the Ethereum. So,
yeah.
What's our solution?
There is one solution. Is the concept. I think, like everything else, the inspiration for everything was the Bitcoin blockchain, right? Bitcoin solved all these problems, introduced the decentralized consensus and all that, and then the token that moves around, that gets distributed on a regular basis to the miner who wins the block, right? Who inserts the last block, and then some programmability. And when the problem of scale was already known before it was created, it will be impossible to go beyond a certain number of transactions. So it was a problem, but the trade-off was let's give up the scale and the speed for the security of storing something that doesn't change. That is very hard to change. Very hard to change. So that was kind of the design decision at the beginning. But then within Bitcoin, there's a protocol called a BAP, improvement proposal, payment channels. Have you heard of payment channels? Which is the basis for Lightning, the Lightning network, right? In payment channels, you basically open a channel, like opening a tab at the bar, right? Go to the bar, bistro. You open a tab, you leave the tab open, you drink all the beers you want without the friction of showing your ID or giving your credit card. And when you leave at 5 a.m. in the morning, completely drunk, you pay the bill. You close the tab. So the speed of every transaction, the request for a drink and the delivery of the drink, the drink is unencumbered by the friction of the payment and the negotiation for the payment. It's already the rule is already open. So you write one instruction to the blockchain, anything happens at the speed of light because it's digital, and potentially it could be hundreds of thousands of transactions. If there's multiple systems, people have calculated much larger number of transactions, simultaneous transactions, than 40,000 a minute or a second, whatever. And then, so the solution is a second layer technology called Lightning Network for Bitcoin or state channels on Ethereum. Similar technology. You just write once, you spend gas only once, so it's a very cheap transaction, but then you can leave it open for months, maybe. If imagine you're a bank and you're an export company and you're settling where you're with your buyer or you're an importer settling with your exporter in China. If you trust the company, you trust the technology, you open a channel January 1st and you close it on December 31st. It's 12 months later. Two writes to the blockchain, and anything that happens in the middle is completely fast and secure and auditable in real time. That is revolutionary. And it's being worked on. That is on the layer 2. The second solution for Ethereum that's being worked on today is how to make the blockchain itself scalable. The actual lower level of the blockchain scalable. And they're copying technologies like sharding, which is the splitting of different shards. A shard is a vertical cut of everything, right? You have all the elements, and they shard it in little bit components. It's like, you remember BitTorrent or Kazaa or Napster and all these things, which basically use distributed. You get a piece of a file from here, a piece of a file from there. So it's, in a way, the distributed computing is about that. It's spreading the same database or the same file, the same unit of computation, if you will, across multiple spaces, and then you integrate it at the time of the execution, right? So all these things are happening. Maybe I didn't explain it. I may not, probably didn't explain it properly, but someone more technical can explain that. People are working on that. There's very smart minds working on scaling the internet, the blockchain.
So yeah, I
Brian?
have a question from the live stream actually. Kind of a general question actually. Do you think the most powerful countries and economies of today's world will within 3 years reach the same point of view, consensus, what I'd say, an acceptance model for the leading cryptocurrencies? Would it be totally illegal or totally legal, whatever, but a consensus?
Well, the problem today is that this globalizing technology is emerging at the time where the people, the government, the world is getting balkanized and segmented, right? We were supposed to evolve as a society, right? And say, oh, now we're all friends, political borders don't matter. We can trade freely between, within relative controls, and that's freely. So we were going to evolve as a society, freedom and globalization. No, it wasn't like that, because the pendulum went to the other side, and now we have very radical political views that say, we don't want to deal with anything, we're going to be protectionistic, we're going to shut down the borders, we're going to protect. It's populism, in a way, considered populism. You can have right-wing populism, you have left-wing populism, but it's a political intention, political goal, in my opinion, rather than a general global better good for society, in my opinion. So we have that problem, right? So to think that governments are going to agree on something as controversial as the blockchain and Bitcoin, very, very hard. I think that it will have to come from the industry. The solutions and the alternatives have to come from the industry. We have to show a different alternative. So I don't know if you, I just came back from Chamonix this weekend. It was incredible, amazing, my first time at Chamonix. But anyway, so you come out of the valley and you have the highway that goes into the valley. And then you have the side roads, right? The small, mountainside, La Corniche, right? So you can choose, that was the old path, right? The old path for the donkeys and the goats. And you can still take those, but it will take you 3 hours to get to Geneva. Whereas if you take the highway, it takes you 15, 20 minutes or half an hour. So the same thing is going to happen. There's going to be an old way of doing things, and now we are inventing new ways of doing things completely different, a new parallel universe. But I do not think the governments will agree on anything.
On government, don't you think that what Venezuela is doing with Petro is a good example that it can get involved? Last week I was in Davos at the WEF, and it was like everybody I met in Davos was talking about blockchain and crypto, including politics.
I know. Okay.
So they are like,
why do you think they're interested in blockchain and Bitcoin?
well, like, with blockchain, we can take control of the two elements that are the most crucial for government.
We or you? Are you?
We, like people.
Oh, okay.
Like KYC.
Maybe you were the government somehow.
I'm not the blockchain side.
Okay. You're the rebel. You're the rebel.
And
yeah.
financial institution. So, like, if they lose somehow the control of those two pillars of how the government and society are built, that freaks them out. So they.
What are the pillars again, please?
KYC and financial institution. So identity.
Identity and.
Financial system.
Okay. So talking about what I just discussed.
Yeah.
So I agree with that. I don't think it's negotiable. Anonymity is not negotiable. Because imagine if the world were completely anonymous. Value transfer and storage were completely anonymous. How would the government enforce you paying taxes?
That's why Korea should done exchange.
What would Gérard Depardieu say? He would be... Okay, so... Seriously, think about that. I mean, society wouldn't function. The state, as an administrative engine, wouldn't function without taxation, without taxes. We wouldn't have public services. We would have more rats than we have, right? We would have fewer hospitals. I know, it's controversial, right?
I think it needs to be like a consensus.
Someone is disagreeing here. I'm just saying, you feel to disagree, right? Sorry.
It's something without a consensus between technologists and government.
Correct. I agree. There has to be a dialogue and a redesign of society, joint redesign of society. Completely agree. Unfortunately, in my opinion, these discussions are not being had. I haven't been in any... I don't get invited to conversations. I mean, I get invited to some conversations, but I think we should accelerate the discussion.
Well, I feel like in South America,
you know what I mean?
Like you being from Argentina, like things are going much faster.
No, we have more awareness, right? When you talk to a gringo, an American, about inflation, what is inflation? They don't know. They believe that banks will always be responsible and safe, that the money will always be protected by the banks and the government. They don't know what living in a mismanaged and corrupt economy means for society. To me, living in Argentina, what happened the last 15 years in Argentina was worse than the Holocaust. How many people died in the Holocaust? 6, 7 million? How many people's lives were crippled by a mismanagement of the economy? 45 million people, than all of my connationals. Okay? So you're screwing the lives of 45 million people and nothing happens. Of course, okay, you know what I mean.
I agree 100% with that. I work with a company who are doing an ACO and we're based in Mexico City. So,
Okay.
like the use case we have there.
Why are you doing an ACO?
Well,
That's a good question.
And it's on camera.
Yeah.
Careful.
Like,
I am responsible for my own speech. You will be responsible for your own.
yeah. Well, so we already have a digital coin being used by our user. And
User, only one?
1.2 million.
Oh, nice. Respect. That's good. Brilliant.
And like using a blockchain protocol, it enables much better transactional capabilities, scalabilities,
Of course.
and adding new feature to the ecosystem. It's not only like because of the buzzword and the network would have keep functioning without blockchain, it would just not be able to scale. And being based in South America, this company,
what obstacles are you encountering in Mexico?
Well, so like the protocol is made for financial and digital inclusion in this country. Like if you haven't been, like 75% of the population, like rough numbers there, is either cut out from the banking system or from the like don't have connectivity.
Do you remember that conversation we had in Colombia?
So we met in Colombia. We met in Colombia. A conference that was basically promising about what FinTech can do for
Financial inclusion.
And we had this conversation, I guess, 2 years ago. And
what has happened?
Nothing. So this is the wild promise of blockchain.
If you guys want more insight on that, like the founder of the company is in Paris right now, and we're doing a meetup just for.
What's his name?
Isaac Phillips.
What is the name of the company?
Seagull.
I don't know. I never heard of it. But anyway, but my point was in that conference, and everyone freaked out, and I never was invited back because I never get invited back. So when I come to a place, I relish in it. I enjoy it. I live to the fullest because I may never come back, right? So, and I tell I give my opinions, and I say, nothing will change in South America until we influence policy and we influence enforcement and oversight, and we understand how things work, and we work collaboratively and all these things. Until that changes, nothing will happen. And I keep saying this to venture capital. They create incubators, angel investors, hundreds and dozens of millions of dollars invested in a country that will never evolve. Why? Because today, innovation is tied to regulation. It's restricted by regulation. And this is my thesis, has been my thesis, and I'm very unhappy to be right, because I would love to be proven wrong. And I've been saying this in Mexico. I worked with Mexico for 7 years, and we were the first ones to launch a prepaid debit card in Mexico. In 2007, July of 2007, we launched, and the rules changed in April 2007. So we had to wait between 2002 to 2005, 5 years, for the rules to change, the regulation to change, so then we can launch a product.
And so you said, like you mentioned, venture capitalists being scared of tokens and ICO.
Yes.
Like you just said, like the point of regulation.
Right.
Is exactly why they're scared. I was in VC before, and like they don't want to hear.
How much money did you lose?
Well, it was not.
Just kidding. But you know, VCs in emerging economies where there's little hope. Okay, where there's little hope there's not a safe and reliable environment for innovation, clear rules of the game, clear enforceability of contracts, fair judges, it doesn't work because there's always abuse.
It's running the same with crypto, unfortunately. That's what, like security token, like we don't see as many of them because the rules change every 5 days.
Okay. Well, but the rules haven't changed about securities. Have they? Well, the standard, what is a security in France? Probably the same as the rest of the world, right? The splitting of the ownership of your company, into an instrument that gives the holder a right and obviously an expectation of profit. And it's a fundraising mechanism. That's how projects get funded.
They're not treated the same way, though.
Okay. I'm just saying things so someone says disagrees. I hate people agreeing with me. Because if we all agree, we cannot have debates. Monsieur?
You mentioned that governments, they just want to allow anonymous transactions because they cannot raise taxes.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, many cryptos are anonymous today. More are getting anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Ethereum is getting. I mean,
Yes, it's adopting zero knowledge proofs. Yeah.
They're not really like discussing on how to allow governments.
Of course.
To
This is what we're trying to invent. We're trying to invent new mechanisms that reconcile the need for privacy and confidentiality, which is human right in a sense, highly desirable by society, with the need to keep criminals out of the system, keep criminals out, and raise taxes to maintain society. Reconciling those two is going to be very hard. And if we don't have those conversations sooner rather than later, we're never going to get there. Please, sorry.
Many of the users of these cryptos, they don't want to lose this anonymity. They're very keen. So, what is your best guess on like what would the government? I mean, would they just decide to make these cryptos illegal, shut down exchanges?
The only thing they can do, the government can do, is put it is enforce the law through intermediaries. So, for example, they could come to La Maison de Bitcoin because it's physical, it's in a corner in Paris, and shut it down for some argument. They could say, okay, they're promoting sedition or treason, whatever, against the country because we're talking about anti-government rhetoric and all that. They could, a lawyer, a very zealous, politically minded lawyer for the government could do anything. They argued for everything successfully. They argued for the capital punishment. They argued for, all kinds of things that are obviously now excessive, but everything can be argued by a lawyer, right? Can be justified. There will always be arguments, right? So I don't think they only can go through intermediaries. They only can go to physical people, or maybe they can go. I still believe, my cynical American immigrant self believes that there's a lot of people who are very vocal anti-government who are on a blacklist already, and who are being watched as they move throughout the world to see if they are too radical in their vision, that's all they can do. So in terms of the interest of people in Davos, for example, World Economic Forum, I think that the world has realized, okay, first of all, greed is a big driver, right, of humanity. And another cynical comment I make all the time is, what if every politician in the world, every government official, what if every law enforcement officer owned tokens, crypto tokens? What would happen?
When you mentioned something earlier about incentivizing people to automate the system,
Yes.
I don't think incentivization works well because people are greedy, and so they always find a way to
Take advantage.
of that. But what works really well is the opposite.
Which is?
Like predation. So like if you do something against the system,
Okay.
then the system eats some of your tokens.
So the stick over the carrot. The threat of punishment.
Unfortunately, that's the only thing that
Okay.
work in
So we're talking game theory now, right? Yes.
I've got two questions online. One is about a token. Since you work for Consensys, why would you not work for Neo token, since they're working on digital identity through that protocol?
Why wouldn't I work for Neo and not? Well,
no, it's kind of a provoking question.
okay.
But it's more about, I guess,
Well, Consensys also is working on dozens of infrastructure systems within Ethereum, like Uport for identity, which is going to be a new paradigm for identity, self-sovereign user control identity, selective disclosure, portable identity. You cross a border, it's yours. It's reputation-based rather than credential-based. It's recoverable socially. All of these things, I mean, it's an innovation engine that is unparalleled, in my opinion. And until that changes, I mean, if that stops happening, I will probably leave.
Okay.
Tell that person.
So, okay, so that was the question. I guess the question
Okay.
is about identity and the solution to that on the blockchain.
Yes.
And then the second question is also provoking: is why do you hate lawyers?
I don't hate lawyers. I need lawyers. We all need lawyers. We need the rule of law. That's what happens. We need the rule of law to eliminate subjectivity, right? We need a system that prevents human abuse, right? What I think has been corrupted, and it's not my idea. You should probably read, that person should probably read Neil Ferguson's The Great Degeneration. It's a great book, Harvard law professor, I think he's Irish or Scottish, Neil Ferguson. The Great Degeneration. I keep it on my Kindle all the time, and I quote it all the time. Because his argument in the book is, we needed a system to evolve as humanity. We needed a system where the rule was objectively created and enforced without the whims of some higher authority. This is why the kings have disappeared from the face of the earth. They're just symbolic. And we still tolerate some kings. But we also have an administrative government. We have a political republican institutions divided by powers and checks and balances. We have a more fair system. But the problem is that when there is complexity, unnecessary complexity, only the intermediaries win. And that is not the purpose of any rule of law. The rule of law is to make society work better and to be as good as possible for every human being on earth, not only a favored few. Those who understand the law, who understand the complexity, who have political power, who have a wink-wink relationship with a regulator. That is not how regulation is supposed to work. So I do not hate lawyers. I believe in the rule of law, and I hate unnecessary intermediation. That's what I hate. Monsieur?
Couldn't be the blockchain technology actually an ally to the state to combat, for example, corruption?
Of course. It's a perfect solution.
Yeah, you give an identity, you follow it all your life.
Exactly.
And you do,
Absolutely.
But
You saw if you imagine, why do you think governments, I mean, what was your impression about in Davos, sir, your monsieur? Is it generally accepted? Is the blockchain generally accepted as a tool, or what is the concern? What is the conversation about?
Well, like obviously, like blockchain people, they are hyped up and like they just can't get enough tokens, and they always want more and always want to buy.
Okay, it's about tokens or fundraising. Well, I met some guys. I work in Dubai. Also, we are advisors to the government of Dubai. We have some business in Dubai, and I go to a meetup. I speak at a meetup, and one guy says, "Oh, we're in India. We just launched 5 ICOs in a week." Really?
Yeah, like that's the problem.
Thank you very much. Don't talk to me anymore. Sorry.
That's a big problem in the market.
That's not how it's supposed to be.
Then when you start talking with politics or
Okay. This goes to your question.
or corporates,
Yes.
then the
What is the primary interest of politicians and corporates with blockchain?
politics they try to understand.
Okay. Learning about it. Okay.
They are still there only.
Okay.
And so like they try to start the conversation to try to think about what would be the good regulation.
Okay.
So some of them are working in the good direction.
Mhm.
Like I know there is a senator in Wyoming who just passed a bill. Who tried to propose a bill like yesterday or 2 days ago
Yes.
to erase all taxes for now on
Okay.
gains of.
What are the 3 types of regulation is that? Prudential, law enforcement, punitive, or stimulative?
Stimulative.
Okay. So this guy is focusing on stimulative policy, right? He wants to remove barriers so money pours into the state. And this is what is happening in the world today, and a reason that politicians are interested in this. It's a magnet for capital, innovation, and change. So Estonia could be a new powerhouse in Europe if they Zug, a small canton, a small city in Switzerland. Right, so this is what technology enables. Now it's no longer about power and politics and clout and armies and trade agreements and other forms of coercion. It's about the ability to attract capital and innovation to your jurisdiction. Whether you're a city like Dubai, a nation or a country like Estonia, or a state like Illinois or Wyoming. This is revolutionary.
The big players like US or France, like the big countries, they don't have the same incentives as Estonia.
Exactly. Because Estonia is a challenger, and the other one is the
Zug, they have a big incentive because
leader.
2 years ago, the US, they took away all the benefits Switzerland had with banking anonymity. And so they need to regain kind of like a banking power.
Exactly.
That's how they live.
Of course.
Really expensively, but that's
Exactly. That's political game theory. It's good. But the question he asked is very interesting. And the reason I wanted to create this discussion is, if you go to Africa, a continent that is in desperate need of stimulation, right? Let's agree on that.
the problem is
They look at the blockchain and say, okay, now we can issue a token, raise money. And then we say, okay, but with the blockchain, you can reinvent your government processes. You can make everything transparent. And the moment you mention transparency, they kick you out.
but that's not
Why? Because no corrupt government official would ever want transparency.
Yeah, but
They want to hide everything.
transparency is not even the main driver for this economy because
Okay.
they lack everything. And like before transparency, they are they crave much more for
Okay.
like solid internet connections and financial systems. So they can save money, they can transfer money, and that's come way before the privacy issue for them.
Of course.
But the problem with Africa, I think it's going to be big adoption there, but the infrastructure are not as good.
Right.
While in
We
South-
still depend on infrastructure, basic
while in
infrastructure.
South America, the infrastructure are quite
Electricity and internet, yeah.
They have good infrastructure because investments
Yeah.
are recent, like
Yes.
thousands,
Okay.
and so the potential is much
Right.
bigger.
That's good analysis. I agree with that. Yeah.
There'll just be 2 more questions. I'm really happy to have you here actually tonight. Tomorrow night we're having the lead dev of Bitcoin Cash, so it's going to be a bit more intense, the conversation.
Okay.
But just 2 more questions, and then for those who want to go to a crypto bar where you can pay in Ethereum, there's just one over there. And so if you want to come also, Juan, you're more than welcome to see that.
Thank you. I'm seeing if I have to go somewhere else. We had plans for tonight, but anyway,
2
so
more questions, basically. People that haven't asked
Monsieur?
questions.
Why do you seem so allergic to the word ICO?
why
Why do you seem so allergic?
allergic to the word ICO? Did I sound look allergic to the word ICO? Well, ICO is very close to IPO, and it shouldn't be, right? So the moment you say ICO, an initial public offering is an offering of securities to raise money, and it happens after 10 years of growth, serious seed, angel, A, B, C, D, and then finally the company is strong enough and solid enough for the security to be listed publicly. That is a normal process for fundraising in the civilized world, right? Initial public offering is the ultimate end or exit for a company, right? And this is when the founders become rich and the early investors become wealthy, and now the retail shareholder can attempt to gain 0.1% growth in 10 years, right? This is how the system works. It only benefits the early adopters and the capital owners, right? So I'm being cynical and critical and also explanatory at the same time, right? So the system works like that. And then they talk about ICOs, initial coin offerings. If I am a securities regulator or a law enforcement officer and I hear the word ICO, I'm obviously going to put you on my gray list at a minimum. Why are you raising money without a product, without a company? Just by offering? Huh? Because they want to innovate. Okay, that's a good question. Let's do that. Let's do it role play. And what if I say, Okay, but who's going to be the owners of your token, and what is the purpose of the token?
People who trust in the usability of the token, and they want you to develop the
So everyone that holds a token will need the token to run a process.
To me, a good ICO is an ICO where people who buy the token want to use it for service or product, and not only for speculative options.
All right. So there's never an expectation of profit. It's just the support of the team, the philanthropy, and the.
You can build a product that is useful for people.
Okay.
And people can.
Okay. So again, to answer your question, ICO immediately points to raising money without complying with regulation. That's it. That's the immediate association in the minds of every knowledgeable person that knows securities laws or regulation. That's it. It may not be a fair assessment. It may be a wrong assessment because it may be a token offering or token event or token launch. This is why we have to name things differently to disassociate the negative connotations from people's minds, right? Why not call it token generation event, TGE? There you go. Euphemisms. Use euphemisms. You know, euphemism is a softening of an impact, a choice of words that softens the impact, right? So token generation event, but regardless of how we call them, the nature of the token, this is where innovation is. And you were talking about innovation. I like that. We have to now present an alternative that didn't exist before. Why? Because now we have tokens that obviously they may trade in the future, they may be tradable and grow in value, but they're also instruments to participate in some form of, and interact with some technology. They may be necessary to interact with technology. Example is Ether. You need Ether to run the computation. If we don't have Ether, the system doesn't run. So it's a very hybrid, it's a very complex utility or alternative use. And of course, you create the market on the side because you want to stimulate adoption, right, and traction. But when you have a design where the token plays a key role in the execution of the protocol, it rewards behavior, it's a required access token or something like that, that is where you have innovation, and the regulation is not contemplating that. Because securities are just, fundraising mechanisms. But technology was not involved when these laws were created 50 years, 60 years ago, right? Now we have the ability to program securities, to create rights, and we can manage things from an app, right? I vote my Apple stock once a year, and I don't know who is in the board or if Ernst & Young is going to be or Price Waterhouse. I don't know who cares. I mean, they make me vote for things once a year. But with a crypto security, you could do more things. You can decide on a specific plan or strategy that the company is implementing, because it appears on your web and your app, and you vote, and then a new decision is made on a very specific. This is what's liquid democracy, the liquidity of the decision making, the segmentation, the granularization of decision making. So that is innovation, and this is why we have to influence policymakers and regulators about new ways of creating value and innovating and creating markets and making all safe. This is why I say we have to implement. The I of implement is you have to be honest with your communications. You have to put caps on your raise, because you don't want to raise unlimited amounts of money. You want to be prudent, because prudential regulation exists for a reason. So why not be innovative and prudent at the same time? They're not incompatible. Every company started with prudence. I mean, the first investment in Google was $10,000. No one invested $100 million in Google the first day. The first check was $10,000. So why can't we not do the same with crypto technology? We should be able. And this is why extremes and spikes and volumes and raises are very bad for the industry, because everyone now is worried about retail investors losing money, abuses, scams, obvious scams. I don't know if you've seen those, but they're global. And I still, and one of my concerns that I said before is the number is so large that there's not going to be possible to enforce the laws. It's like a swarm of bees. How do you protect yourself from a swarm of bees? You cannot just, one by one. You have the swarm. So the government are now being stung by a swarm of bees. How do they protect themselves? Huh? Munchie. Okay. Well, so these are the questions that we have to deal with, and we have to have these conversations. Sorry to disappoint you, but I think there is a way. Well, anything else is going to be just, okay, that we're playing with fire, okay? So the problem with regulation is that it's always hanging over your head. It's not that it doesn't exist. It's always over your head. It's like the Holy Spirit. We in Catholic, I don't know if you're Catholic, but Catholics, you're born with a threat that you have someone watching over you all the time. So guilt is embedded in your head all the time. Oh, I can't do this, guilt. Someone's watching me, that's regulation. Regulation abhors a vacuum. So there will always be regulation somewhere. Question is, what kind of regulation, how it's designed, how it's enforced, and whether it's stimulative, preventative, and punitive in the right proportion. All right? Thank you so much for your attention. Merci beaucoup. Je vous remercie bien.